let's talk about Muslim people who are of Asian descent. Now this is going to get a little bit confusing, but just to be clear, here in the United States, American mindset, first of all, what is Asian? Okay, most Americans, when we think Asian, here's what we're saying: Japanese, Chinese, Thai, Korean, Filipino, etc. What we're not talking about is India, Pakistan. Those are Middle Eastern countries as far as we're concerned. But we are talking about, when we say Asian, we mean people who are going to be, you can look at them, most likely they're going to look like someone like Bruce Lee, just to make it really simple for the context of this video. So here's what I'm saying. Collectively, Americans struggle with the concept of Asians being Muslim. It doesn't, quote, fit. Okay? Now, people love to say in the comment section that I'm an ignorant American, and I'm sure to some degree I culturally am. Our perspective is a lot different than Europe, for example. And only a couple years ago did I learn this. So obviously I know that most people in the Middle East are Muslim. However, the majority of Muslims in the world are not in the Middle East. Instead, they're in Indonesia. And I think that's interesting. So when I heard that, I tried to imagine someone who, quote, looks Asian. Again, just for reference, I'll name Bruce Lee. But someone who looks like that, being Muslim, that doesn't fit. Because largely to some degree, I think especially here in the United States, there are certain races or ethnicities that there's a religion that is most predictable with that. I mean, when we look at Jewish Americans, for example, here in the United States, you can largely look at a person, and if you find out they're Jewish, you're like, oh yeah, I can see that. That's what people tend to say when they find out someone's Jewish, because they, quote, look Jewish. Many people outside the United States would disagree with that statement, but here in the United States, we're very aware of it. The majority of actors here in the United States are Jewish Americans. So just in that, we're exposed. I mean, it's hard to watch a movie here in the United States that doesn't have at least one main actor who's Jewish. So we become very aware of what Jewish Americans look like, despite them being a minority here in the United States, which something that complicates that is, in theory, Jewish people are considered white, even though they're Middle Eastern. And it's interesting because the way that Americans perceive things, typically Middle Eastern people are not perceived as white. That's how, what's interesting, I think, is Middle Eastern people in the United States would probably perceive themselves as white, but mainstream, collectively, most people would not perceive Middle Eastern people as white. Except for Jewish people, they sort of get a pass. Somehow they're perceived as white, whereas a Middle Eastern person would not be perceived that way. So, going back to the topic at hand though, it's difficult for us to perceive, if we look at a person who, quote, looks Chinese, they're not Muslim. There's no way that could be. But, quote, mind-blown moment, the majority of Muslims on the planet live in a, quote, Asian country, Indonesia. I said it like it was some kind of medicine that you take if your stomach's upset. I need to take some Indonesia. I'm thinking, or am I thinking of echinacea? Yeah, that herbal tea if you're getting sick. So there you go. There's the topic to discuss in the comments. This concept that many Asian people are Muslim. Here in the United States, we're not exposed to that. When we see someone who identifies as Muslim, they look a certain way, their ethnic background, their genes, you can see that in the same way that a person who identifies as Jewish looks a certain way. I think that's interesting because in our minds, if you look a certain way, if you are religious, then you're of a predictable religion. Let's discuss this further in the comments right here. I am the famous American.